The envelope trembled in my hands as I stood in the mailroom, surrounded by towers of packages and the mechanical hum of sorting machines. This wasn't just any envelope. It was the merger agreement that would make my family's company worth $200 million. dollars. The same company where my father had just demoted me from vice president of operations to mail clerk. The same family that had killed me in my last life. I ran my fingers along the sealed edge, feeling the weight of destiny in this simple paper rectangle. 3 floors above me, my father, stepmother, and half-sister were waiting in the boardroom, champagne already chilling, ready to celebrate the deal that would cement their fortune. They had no idea that their newly demoted mail clerk held their future in her hands. They had no idea I remembered everything from before, every betrayal, every cruelty, and most importantly, exactly how this deal would fall apart in 3 days when our biggest competitor would swoop in with insider information my sister would accidentally leak during her drunken celebration tonight. Not this time. I glanced at the clock. 2:47 p.m. In my previous life, this envelope had been delivered at 3 p.m. sharp, just in time for the signing ceremony. The Hong Kong investors would arrive at 3:30. My father would give his practice speech about family legacy and corporate values, the irony of which had made me sick even then. And by 4 p.m., the contracts would be signed. By midnight, my sister Elena would be at Club Veritas, bragging to Marcus Chen about the deal, not knowing he was a plant from Apex Industries. By Monday, Apex would undercut our offer with the Hong Kong group. Using our own proprietary information, the deal would collapse. And somehow, it would all be my fault. My father had blamed me for not properly securing our data systems, even though I'd been locked out of those systems weeks before when they'd started their campaign to push me out. The mailroom door opened, and Tommy, the security guard, poked his head in. "Sophie, you good down here? Your dad's assistant has called 3 times asking about a priority package." I forced a smile. "Just sorting through the international deliveries. You know how it is. Everything's priority when it comes from the executive floor." Tommy laughed, but his eyes held sympathy. Everyone in the building knew about my demotion. Going from VP to mail clerk in a family company was the kind of gossip that spread faster than wildfire. "Take your time," he said kindly. "Make them wait a little." If only he knew how long I was planning to make them wait. As Tommy's footsteps faded, I walked to the industrial shredder in the corner of the mailroom. One push of a button, and this deal would be gone forever. But that would be too simple, too traceable. Security cameras covered every inch of this room, another improvement. My stepmother had insisted on after accusing me of stealing office supplies in my past life. No, I needed to be smarter this time. I thought back to that night 5 years from now. Or was it 5 years ago? Time became fluid when you died at 28 and woke up at 23 again. The car accident hadn't been an accident at all. The brake lines don't just corrode overnight, especially not on a car that had just been serviced. My sister Elena had suggested I take her car that day since mine was making weird noises. My stepmother Catherine had insisted I drive to the remote client site alone, despite protocol requiring 2 team members for contracts that large. And my father? He'd been conveniently in London, establishing his alibi. The investigators had ruled it an accident. Tragic, they'd said. The poor Henderson girl, dying so young just months after her demotion. Some whispered about suicide, depression from losing her position in the family company. But I'd been conscious for those last moments, trapped in the wreckage, and I'd seen Elena's car following at a distance, waiting to confirm the job was done. Then darkness. Then light. Then waking up in my apartment 5 years earlier, the morning of my 23rd birthday, with every memory intact and one chance to change everything. The first time around, I'd been naive. I'd believed that blood meant something, that surely my father loved me despite favoring Elena. I'd worked 18-hour days to prove my worth, landed million-dollar contracts, streamlined operations to save the company during the recession. But every success I achieved was credited to Elena or Catherine's guidance. Every failure, no matter how small, was magnified and blamed entirely on me. They'd started the demotion campaign 6 months ago, right on schedule. First came the concerns about my leadership style. Then the anonymous complaints that were obviously written in Catherine's distinctive passive-aggressive prose. The final blow was the cybersecurity breach that happened while I was presenting at the Singapore conference. Somehow, hackers had used my credentials to access our financial data. Never mind that I'd been on a plane over the Pacific when the breach occurred. Never mind that the IP address traced back to a computer in Elena's apartment. Daddy needed someone to blame, and I was always the perfect scapegoat. But this time, I knew it was coming. I'd prepared. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted app I'd installed weeks ago. Every piece of evidence I'd collected was stored here. Screenshots of Elena accessing my credentials, recordings of Catherine planning the false complaints, financial documents showing their embezzlement. But the crown jewel was the email thread I'd discovered between Catherine and Marcus Chen from Apex Industries, dated 3 weeks ago, discussing the upcoming opportunity with the Hong Kong investors. They'd been planning to sabotage this deal all along. The original plan, as I'd learned in my previous life, was elegant in its cruelty. Let the deal go through, let Elena leak the information, let Apex steal it, then blame me for the security failure. Catherine's brother sat on Apex's board. He'd ensure she and Elena got a finder's fee for the information. $20 million for destroying the company, while my father scrambled to recover and eventually had to sell to Apex at a massive loss. Catherine would divorce him within the year, taking half of what remained, while Elena used her Apex connections to start her own firm. I'd learned all this at the end, of course. Catherine had visited me in the hospital after my first accident, a failed brake line that I'd somehow survived. She'd thought I was unconscious, but I'd heard every word of her gloating confession. "You were never supposed to exist," she'd said. Richard's first wife should have known her place and disappeared. But no, she had to leave behind a reminder, a living claim to what should have been Elena's alone. My crime? Being born? Being my father's daughter from his first marriage. Being a living reminder that Catherine was the second wife, that Elena was the second daughter, that their claim to the Henderson fortune was forever tainted by my existence. I looked at the envelope again. Inside was the contract that would change everything or destroy everything depending on whose hands it reached. The Hong Kong investors were particular about protocol, any delay, any irregularity, and they'd walk. I'd learned that the hard way in my previous life when they'd nearly canceled the whole deal because the coffee service was 5 minutes late. If this contract didn't arrive on time, if it arrived at all, there would be consequences. I made my decision. Carefully, I opened the package meant for the Korean semiconductor firm 2 floors down, a completely legitimate delivery that had arrived this morning. I swapped the contents, resealed both packages with the industrial-grade tape we used for international shipments. The Henderson contract was now heading to confused executives at Kim Technologies, while their quarterly reports would arrive in my father's boardroom. By the time anyone figured out the mix-up, it would be too late. But that was just the beginning. I composed a text on my personal phone, the one they didn't know about. Phase 1 complete. Proceed with Phase 2. The response was immediate. Understood. Grandfather is en route. Grandfather, Harrison Henderson. The family patriarch who'd built this company from nothing, who'd been pushed out by Catherine's machinations and my father's weakness. The man who'd supposedly died of a heart attack 2 years ago, except I knew better now. He was living quietly in Maine, having faked his death after discovering Catherine's first attempt to poison him. I'd found him 3 months ago after my rebirth and told him everything. He hadn't believed me at first. Who would? But I knew things only someone from the future could know. I knew about his secret account in the Caymans, the one he'd never told anyone about. I knew about the birthmark on his chest shaped like a crescent moon. I knew the last words his wife had said to him before she died. Words he'd never shared with another soul. He believed me now, and he was angry. My phone buzzed with a message from my father's assistant, Patricia. "Where is the Hong Kong package?" I typed back slowly, taking my time. "Checking all international deliveries. Large volume today. Will locate ASFP." 3 dots appeared as she typed, then disappeared. I could imagine her frustration, probably being yelled at by my father, who was being pressured by Catherine, who was panicking because everything needed to be perfect for her plan to work. I returned to my sorting, making a show of checking every package meticulously for the security cameras. After 15 minutes, I sent another update. May have been missorted with the morning deliveries. Checking with other departments. The beauty of being demoted to the mailroom was that everyone expected incompetence. Why would a former VP know how to sort mail properly? It was beneath her, they'd all laughed. Let's see how the princess handles real work, Catherine had smirked. My phone rang, father. Sophie, what the hell is going on down there? His voice was strained, trying to maintain control in front of the investors who were probably already in the building. I'm sorry, father. There were over 300 packages today, and the regular mailroom supervisor called in sick. I'm doing my best. I don't want excuses. Find that package now. I'm checking with every department. It might take another hour. An hour? The investors are already here. I let a small tremor enter my voice, the perfect touch of incompetent panic. I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with the system yet. Maybe if Elena came down to help. Elena? Elena is preparing the presentation. She's doing actual important work, not sorting mail like a... He caught himself, but we both knew what he'd been about to say. Like a failure. Like a disappointment. Like the daughter he wished he'd never had. I'll find it, I whispered. I promise. He hung up without another word. I smiled, remembering how this conversation had gone in my original timeline. He'd screamed at me for 5 minutes straight, calling me useless, threatening to fire me from even the mailroom. Elena had come down, found the package in 30 seconds. It had been sitting in plain sight, and used the moment to remind everyone how Sophie couldn't handle even the simplest tasks. The investors had laughed it off, but the seed of doubt about our company's competence had been planted. This time was different. This time there was no package to find. I spent the next 40 minutes making a show of searching, calling other departments, even checking the loading dock. Patricia came down personally, her usually perfect composure cracking. Sophie, please. The investors are getting impatient. Your father is... She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Furious, humiliated. Everything Catherine wanted him to be. I found the morning delivery logs, I said, pulling up the doctored records I'd prepared. Look, there's no entry for any Hong Kong package. Are you sure it was sent? Patricia's face went pale. Of course it was sent. I processed it myself yesterday for today's delivery. Yesterday was Sunday. We don't process international deliveries on Sundays. No, I mean Friday. I processed it Friday for Monday delivery. I made a show of checking the computer again. Today's Tuesday. The color drained from her face completely. In her panic about my incompetence, she'd forgotten what day it was. The doubt was creeping in now. Had she processed it correctly? Had there been a mistake? Check again, she said desperately. Please, just check again. I nodded sympathetically and returned to my fruitless search while she ran back upstairs. The beauty of gaslighting is that once you plant the seed of doubt, people's own minds do most of the work. Patricia would now be second-guessing herself, checking her sent emails, her calendar, everything. The more she looked, the more confused she'd become, because the email confirmations I'd deleted from the server no longer existed. At 3:30 p.m., exactly when the Hong Kong investors were supposed to arrive, my grandfather walked through the front door of Henderson Industries. The security guards didn't recognize him at first. The death and 2 years of absence had changed him. But when he announced himself as Harrison Henderson, chairman emeritus and majority shareholder, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. I wasn't there to see my father's face when grandfather walked into the boardroom. I was still in the mailroom, maintaining my cover. But I heard about it later from multiple sources. The blood draining from his face, Catherine's sharp intake of breath, Elena dropping her presentation notes, and the Hong Kong investors confused but intrigued by this unexpected drama. Richard, grandfather had said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. We need to talk about your wife's interesting relationship with Apex Industries. The meeting had dissolved into chaos. The Hong Kong investors, sensing the internal conflict, had politely excused themselves, saying they would need to reassess the situation. Catherine had tried to deny everything, but grandfather had come prepared with the evidence I'd gathered. The emails, the financial transfers, the recorded conversations. By 4 p.m., when I finally emerged from the mailroom with the tragic news that the Hong Kong package appeared to have been lost in transit, the damage was done. The investors were gone. Catherine was in my father's office screaming denials, and Elena was frantically trying to delete emails from her computer, not knowing I'd already backed up everything to the cloud. But we were just getting started. That evening, I sat in my small apartment eating takeout Chinese food and monitoring the chaos through the various bugs I'd planted in the office. The preparation for this moment had taken months. Every keystroke logger, every hidden camera, every piece of corrupted software had been carefully placed during my final weeks as VP, when I still had access to every system and no one suspected I knew what was coming. Catherine's voice crackled through my laptop speaker. "It doesn't matter what your father says, we stick to the plan. Elena, you still meet with Marcus tonight." "But Mom, Grandfather Henderson, he's supposed to be dead." "Your grandfather is a senile old man who faked his death for attention. No one will believe him over us. We have Richard wrapped around our finger." My father's voice, weak and pathetic. "Catherine, if what he showed me is true." "It's not true. Would I lie to you? Would your own daughter lie to you? That little bitch Sophie has poisoned him against us somehow. This is all her doing." "Sophie? She's been in the mailroom all day. She couldn't even find a simple package." "Exactly what she wants you to think. She's playing dumb, Richard. Can't you see it?" There was a long pause. Then my father's voice, colder now. "Elena, you're not going to that club tonight." "But Daddy—" "No, not until we figure out what's happening. And Catherine, I want to see your phone." "My phone? Richard, this is ridiculous. You're going to believe your father who abandoned you over your own wife?" "My father never abandoned me. You told me he had dementia, that the doctor said it would be better if I didn't visit. You handled his medical care. You arranged the funeral. The closed casket funeral." The silence was deafening. I could picture the scene. Catherine realizing her carefully constructed lies were unraveling. Elena watching her mother's mask finally slip. And my father, for perhaps the first time in years, actually seeing the truth. But Catherine was nothing if not resourceful. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with hurt innocence. "Check my phone, check everything. When you find nothing, I expect an apology. And Richard, if you're choosing your father and that disappointment of a daughter over your wife and Elena, then perhaps we should reconsider this marriage." The ultimatum hung in the air like a poison cloud. In my previous life, this tactic had always worked. My father, terrified of being alone, desperate for Catherine's approval, would always cave. But this time, he had grandfather back. This time, he'd seen the evidence. "Perhaps we should," my father said quietly. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the speaker. I smiled and reached for another spring roll. Phase 2 was complete. Time for Phase 3. That night, while my family tore itself apart in their mansion across town, I met with the Hong Kong investors at a quiet restaurant downtown. Grandfather had arranged the meeting, presenting me as his personal representative. The investors were skeptical at first. Why should they deal with a mailroom clerk? But I'd come prepared. Not just with the real contract, safely retrieved from Kim Technologies, who were very confused but cooperative, but with something better, a complete restructuring plan for Henderson Industries, one that would double their investment within 3 years. "You see," I explained, pulling up the presentation on my tablet, "the current leadership has been embezzling funds for the past 18 months. Here are the accounts, the transfers, the shell companies. With new management and the recovery of these funds, the company's value increases by 30% immediately." Mr. Chen, the lead investor, studied the documents carefully. "And you have proof of this embezzlement?" "Indisputable proof. My grandfather has already contacted the authorities. By tomorrow morning, Catherine Henderson and her daughter will be under federal investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. And your father?" "Was unaware of his wife's activities, though his negligence in oversight makes him unfit to continue as CEO." I met Mr. Chen's eyes directly. "My grandfather will be resuming his position as chairman, and he's appointing me as interim CEO. You. Forgive me, Miss Henderson, but aren't you currently working in the mailroom?" I smiled. A temporary setback orchestrated by those who saw me as a threat. My record speaks for itself. I increased operational efficiency by 23% during my tenure as VP, landed the Yamamoto contract that everyone said was impossible, and identified the security vulnerabilities that my stepfamily later exploited. Every success attributed to Elena Henderson was actually my work, and I have the documentation to prove it. Mr. Chen exchanged glances with his colleagues. They spoke rapidly in Mandarin, not knowing I'd spent years studying the language in preparation for exactly this moment. They were impressed but cautious, worried about the instability. "The turmoil concerns us," Mr. Chen finally said in English. "Perhaps we should wait." "Apex Industries won't wait," I interrupted. "They're planning to approach you next week with an offer based on stolen proprietary information from Henderson Industries. Information they obtained through Marcus Chen. Is he a relative, by the way?" Mr. Chen's expression tightened. "A distant cousin. How did you know about Apex's plan?" "Because Catherine Henderson has been feeding them information for months, in exchange for a $20 million payout once they acquire our company at a reduced price after this deal fails. Your cousin Marcus is their inside man, tasked with approaching Elena tonight to get the final details needed to undercut our offer." I slid another tablet across the table, this one showing the email exchanges between Catherine and Apex, including several mentioning Marcus Chen by name. "It seems," Mr. Chen said slowly, "that we have been targeted for manipulation." "Yes, but not by Henderson Industries, by those who sought to destroy it from within. My grandfather and I are offering you a chance to be part of the solution, not victims of the scheme." The negotiations went on for 3 more hours. By the end, we had a deal. Better terms than the original, actually, with me personally guaranteeing the benchmarks with my own assets. Well, the assets I would have once Catherine's embezzlement was proven and the funds recovered. As I left the restaurant at midnight, my phone buzzed with messages. 17 missed calls from my father, 12 from Elena, 43 from Catherine, and 1 text from Patricia. "The package was delivered to Kim Technologies by mistake. I'm so sorry for the confusion." I texted back, "No worries, these things happen. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow, when the FBI would arrive at 9 a.m. sharp with warrants. When the board would hold an emergency meeting to reinstate grandfather and appoint me as CEO. When the Hong Kong deal would be announced with great fanfare, saving the company from the manufactured crisis. But tonight, I had one more stop to make. Club Veritas was exactly as I remembered it. Too loud, too crowded, too desperate. Elena was there, despite my father's orders, sitting in VIP with Marcus Chen. She was already 3 drinks in, her voice carrying over the music as she complained about the day's events. "Can you believe it? My grandfather just shows up, supposedly back from the dead, and ruins everything. And Sophie, useless Sophie, who can't even sort mail properly, somehow she's behind this. I know it." Marcus leaned in closer, refilling her drink. "Tell me about the Hong Kong deal. Is it really dead?" "Dead? No, just delayed. Daddy will fix it. He always does. The terms are incredible. We're selling the subsidiary for $50 million over market value because of the patent portfolio." "Patent portfolio?" "The AI predictive modeling system. It's worth hundreds of millions if properly marketed, but the investors don't know that. We buried it in subsection 47 of the appendix. I recorded every word from my position at the bar, the directional microphone on my phone picking up their entire conversation. Marcus was good, I had to admit. He extracted information from Elena like a surgeon, precise and careful, making her think each revelation was her idea. By 2 a.m., he had everything. The real valuations, the hidden assets, the weaknesses in our negotiating position. Or rather, what Elena thought were our weaknesses. The information she was sharing was 3 weeks out of date, carefully curated misinformation I'd planted in the systems she had access to. As Elena stumbled to the bathroom, Marcus made a phone call. I recorded this too. His report to his handlers at Apex, the smug satisfaction in his voice as he detailed how he'd compromised the Henderson heir. When Elena returned, mascara slightly smudged, she leaned into Marcus with drunken confidence. "You know what the best part is? Once this deal goes through, Mommy says we can finally get rid of Sophie permanently. Make it look like an accident, maybe. She's so depressed about the demotion, everyone would believe she finally snapped." My blood ran cold, even though I'd heard this before. In my previous life, I'd never known about this conversation, never known how casually they'd discussed my murder over drinks and loud music. Marcus looked uncomfortable. That's extreme. Is it? She's in the way. She's always been in the way. Daddy might have loved her once, but not anymore. Not after we're done destroying her reputation. By next month, she'll be either dead or wishing she was. I'd heard enough. I sent the recording to my lawyer, CCing the FBI agent handling our case, with a note. Conspiracy to commit murder, please advise. As I left the club, I passed Elena one last time. She was laughing at something Marcus had said, her head thrown back, completely unaware that her entire world would come crashing down in less than 7 hours. Sophie? She noticed me, her eyes struggling to focus. What are you doing here? Don't you have packages to sort tomorrow? Just leaving, I said calmly. Enjoy your evening, Elena. She laughed, that cruel, tinkling laugh I'd heard so many times. Oh, I am. Marcus, this is my stepsister Sophie, the one I was telling you about. Marcus extended his hand and I shook it, noting the slight tremor in his grip. He knew who I was. My photo was probably in his Apex dossier. Pleasure to meet you, he said. Likewise, I hope you're getting everything you need from my sister. His eyes sharpened, searching my face for hidden meaning, but I kept my expression neutral, almost vacant. The useless sister who couldn't even sort mail properly. Sophie's having a hard time adjusting to her new position, Elena said with false sympathy. It must be so difficult going from a VP to mailroom. But don't worry, sis. I'm sure you'll work your way back up. Maybe in 10 or 15 years you could be a secretary. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe things will change sooner than you think. Elena laughed again. Things don't change at Henderson Industries. Not unless we want them to. I smiled. We'll see. The next morning came faster than expected. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the FBI raid, to begin my final preparations. The mailroom was quiet, peaceful even, as I sorted through the packages that had arrived overnight. Patricia found me there at 7:30, looking haggard. Sophie, I need to apologize about yesterday. The stress of the situation? It's fine, I assured her. These things happen. Your father wants to see you. Now. I followed her to the executive floor, noting the tension in every employee we passed. Word had spread about grandfather's return, about the scene in the boardroom. The kingdom was shaking, and everyone was choosing sides. My father sat behind his massive desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Catherine's chair, the one she'd installed when she'd made herself co-CEO, was empty. Sit, he commanded. I sat. Your grandfather says you've been in contact with him for months. Yes. You knew he was alive. Yes. And you didn't tell me? I met his eyes directly. Would you have believed me? Or would you have told Catherine, who would have made sure he disappeared permanently this time? He flinched. I would never. You demoted me to the mailroom based on fabricated evidence. You believed every lie Catherine told you about me. You stood by while she and Elena systematically destroyed my career. Why would I trust you with grandfather's life? The words hung between us, years of hurt and betrayal finally spoken aloud. I'm your father, he said weakly. No, I replied. You're Richard Henderson, CEO of Henderson Industries? Husband to Catherine Henderson, father to Elena Henderson. I'm just an inconvenient reminder of your first marriage, the daughter you never wanted. That's not true, isn't it? Name one birthday of mine you've attended in the last 5 years. Name one achievement of mine you've celebrated. Name one time you've defended me against Catherine's accusations. Silence. I can name dozens for Elena, I continued. The party you threw when she graduated with her purchase degree. The promotion you gave her despite her never completing a single project. The car you bought her when she crashed the third one. Enough! His voice was hollow. What do you want? An apology? I want nothing from you. Grandfather wants his company back. The board wants competent leadership. The FBI wants the criminals you've been harboring. And me? I just want to do my job. Your job? You're a mail clerk. The door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, led by Special Agent Martinez, whom I'd been corresponding with for weeks. Richard Henderson, we have a warrant to search these premises and all company records. Catherine Henderson and Elena Henderson are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. My father stood, shock evident on his face, saying, "This is a mistake." "No mistake, sir. We also need to question you regarding your knowledge of these activities." As they led him away for questioning, he looked back at me, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "You planned this. All of it." "No," I said quietly. "Catherine planned it. I just made sure she got caught." The next few hours were controlled chaos. FBI agents combed through every office, every computer, every file. Catherine and Elena were arrested at the mansion. Catherine in silk pajamas and cold cream. Elena hungover and hysterical. The news media, tipped off by an anonymous source, me, captured every moment. By noon, the board had convened an emergency meeting. Grandfather, looking every inch the titan of industry he'd always been, took his rightful place at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, "we have a crisis and an opportunity. The crisis is clear. Our CEO and his family have been embezzling from this company for years. The opportunity is to rebuild, stronger and better than before." "Harrison," board member William Cross interjected, "with all due respect, you've been gone for 2 years. The business landscape has changed." "Which is why I'm not proposing to run day-to-day operations," Grandfather said. "I'm too old for that, and we both know it. I'm proposing new leadership, someone who knows this company inside and out, who identified the corruption despite being targeted by it, who has the vision to take us into the future." "Who?" William asked, though his eyes were already moving to me. "Sophie Henderson," Grandfather announced. "My granddaughter, your new CEO." The room erupted in protests. I was too young, too inexperienced, too compromised by the recent demotion. But Grandfather had come prepared. He distributed packets to each board member, my real record, every success I'd achieved, every innovation I'd implemented, every contract I'd secured, all with documentation proving Elena had taken credit for my work. "Furthermore," Grandfather continued, "Sophie has already secured the Hong Kong deal on improved terms, saving us from what would have been a catastrophic loss." Mr. Chen, who had been invited to observe, stood up. "I can confirm this. Ms. Henderson presented us with a comprehensive plan last night that not only salvages the original deal but improves upon it substantially. The Henderson Industries we're investing in, under her leadership, is valued at 30% more than the one we were originally considering." The vote was closer than I would have liked. 7 in favor, 4 against, 1 abstention. But it was enough. At 23 years old, I became the youngest CEO in Henderson Industries history. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Catherine's embezzlement was even worse than I'd known. $30 million siphoned over 2 years into accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. Elena had her own side schemes, selling company secrets to competitors for designer handbags and exotic vacations. The FBI found evidence of 6 different corporate espionage operations, 3 cases of insider trading, and yes, conspiracy to commit murder, mine. My father wasn't charged with any crimes, but his reputation was destroyed. The board allowed him to resign quietly with a modest severance package that Grandfather insisted on despite my objections. He was still my father, Grandfather reminded me, even if he'd failed in that role. Catherine and Elena were less fortunate. The federal charges alone would put them away for 15 to 20 years, not counting the state charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Their assets were frozen, their property seized. The mansion I'd grown up in, where I'd been treated like an unwanted guest, was sold to pay restitution. But I wasn't done yet. Marcus Chen and Apex Industries still needed to be dealt with. The information Elena had fed them was poisoned. Every piece of data subtly wrong, every valuation off by just enough to matter. When Apex tried to use this information to poach our clients, they found themselves offering deals based on fictional numbers, proposing partnerships with companies that didn't exist, citing patents we didn't own. The business world is unforgiving of such mistakes. Within a month, Apex's stock had dropped 40%. Marcus Chen was quietly fired, his reputation in ruins. The company that had tried to destroy us was itself on the brink of collapse. I could have left it there, but revenge is a dish best served cold and thoroughly. I approached the Apex board with an offer. Henderson Industries would acquire them at a generous 20% above their current market value. It was more than they deserved, but less than they needed. They had 48 hours to decide, I told them, or I would withdraw the offer and let them sink. They accepted in 36. The integration was smooth and ruthless. Every executive who had participated in Catherine's scheme was terminated with cause, no severance, no references. Those who had been unaware but competent were retained, but under new management, my management. Within 6 months, Henderson Industries had doubled in value. The Hong Kong investment had paid off spectacularly. The patent portfolio Elena had mentioned worth even more than predicted. The AI modeling system, properly marketed, revolutionized predictive analytics in manufacturing. We went from a regional player to a national force, then international. I modernized everything: operations, culture, philosophy. The old boys club that had enabled Catherine's corruption was dismantled. I instituted transparency measures, whistleblower protections, and merit-based promotions. The company that had nearly destroyed me became my weapon to build something better. But success is hollow without someone to share it with. That's when David entered my life, or re-entered it, I suppose. In my previous life, he'd been a client, someone I'd worked with briefly before my demotion. We'd had a connection, but I'd been too focused on proving myself to pursue it. This time, when he called to congratulate me on the CEO appointment, I didn't let the opportunity pass. "Would you like to have dinner?" he asked, "to celebrate your success?" "I'd love to," I replied, remembering how he'd died in my previous timeline, a plane crash 3 years from now that I would make sure never happened. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully. I'd learned not to trust easily, but David was different. He saw me, not my position, or my wealth, or my family drama. He saw Sophie, the woman who still sometimes woke up in cold sweats, remembering the feeling of dying alone in a crushed car. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony with grandfather, a few close friends, and none of my biological family. My father had moved to Florida, where he lived quietly on his severance, sending occasional emails I never answered. Prison mail from Catherine and Elena went straight to the trash, unopened. On my wedding day, grandfather pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, his eyes misty. "Not for the revenge, though they deserved it, but for what you built from the ashes. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. It might have taken longer, been harder, but you would have found a way. You're a Henderson, the best of us. Your grandmother would have been so proud." That night, as David and I danced at our reception, he whispered, "No regrets." I thought about it. Regrets about my father, maybe. About the relationship we never had. Regrets about the years of abuse I'd endured in my first life. But regrets about how I'd handled my second chance? None, I said firmly. The company continued to grow. We expanded into renewable energy, medical technology, artificial intelligence. Every success was a vindication, proof that I'd been right all along. The girl they'd demoted to the mailroom was now running an empire worth billions. Elena was released after serving 7 years, her sentence reduced for good behavior and cooperation with authorities. She tried to contact me once, a long letter about forgiveness and family and second chances. I had my assistant return it unopened with a cease and desist order. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. Catherine served 12 years, unrepentant to the end. When she was released, she discovered that the world had moved on without her. Her society friends wanted nothing to do with a convicted felon. Her family money was gone, consumed by legal fees and restitution. She ended up working as a receptionist at a small law firm in Ohio, the kind of place that didn't run background checks. My father lived another 10 years, dying quietly of heart failure in a Florida nursing home. I paid for his care, the best facility, the best doctors, but I never visited. Grandfather went a few times, returning each time sadder and older looking. "He asks about you," grandfather said after one visit. "I know. He's sorry. I know that too. Forgiveness isn't for them, Sophie. It's for us." "I have forgiven him," I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. He made his choices. He chose Catherine over me, chose Elena over me, chose his comfort over truth. I've forgiven him, but I won't forget. Grandfather died 5 years later, peacefully in his sleep at 91. He left me everything, not just the money or the company shares, but his journals, his photographs, the watch his father had given him. In his final letter to me, he wrote, "My dearest Sophie, you saved more than just our company. You saved me. Those 2 years in exile, I'd given up. I was ready to die forgotten and betrayed. But then you found me, with your impossible story and your fierce determination, and you gave me purpose again. You gave me the chance to right the wrongs I'd allowed to happen. I know the burden you carry, the knowledge of a life that was and a life that is. Use it wisely, love deeply, build something that lasts, and never, ever let them put you in the mailroom again. All my love, grandfather." David and I had 3 children: Harrison, after grandfather, Lily, after my grandmother, and James, who chose his own path. I told them stories about their great-grandfather, about building empires and fighting for what's right. I never told them about my first life, about dying at 28 and being reborn. Some secrets are too heavy to share. But I prepared them. I taught them to be strong but kind, successful but ethical, careful but brave. I taught them to recognize manipulation, to value truth over comfort, to stand up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. Most importantly, I taught them that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, loyalty, and love. The mailroom where I'd orchestrated my revenge was eventually renovated into a state-of-the-art automation center. But I kept one corner as it was, the spot where I'd stood holding that envelope, making the choice that changed everything. I had a plaque installed there, small and unobtrusive. Every empire begins with a single decision. Sometimes I stood there, usually late at night when the building was empty, and remembered the fear, the anger, the determination. The girl who'd died betrayed and alone, and the woman who'd risen from those ashes to build something extraordinary. One night, 25 years after my rebirth, I found my daughter Lily standing in that spot, reading the plaque. "Mom, what decision?" she asked. I looked at her, 23, the same age I'd been when I'd gotten my second chance, brilliant and ambitious and untouched by the cruelty that had shaped me. "The decision to fight back," I said, "to not accept the role others assigned to me, to believe I deserved better." Was it hard? The hardest thing I've ever done. Was it worth it? I thought about Elena, last I'd heard working as a grocery store manager in Detroit. About Catherine, who'd died alone and bitter in a charity ward. About my father, who'd spent his final years haunted by his choices. Then I thought about the company I'd built, the lives I'd changed, the family I'd created with David. "Every moment," I said. She hugged me then, spontaneous and warm, the kind of affection I'd never received in my first life. "I'm glad you fought, Mom. I'm glad you won." As we walked out together, I took one last look at the mailroom. Such an ordinary place for such an extraordinary revenge. But that's the thing about second chances. They don't always come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes they come in small decisions, in choosing to fight instead of surrender, in recognizing that a demotion to the mailroom isn't an ending but an opportunity. The Hong Kong deal that had started it all was now just one small part of Henderson Industries' portfolio. We'd gone so far beyond those initial millions that the original contract seemed quaint. But I kept a copy in my office safe, not the one I'd hidden from my family that day, but the one we'd actually signed with my signature as CEO. Sometimes when young employees came to me discouraged about setbacks or demotions, I'd tell them a story. Not the whole truth. That was mine alone to carry, but enough. About a girl who was demoted to the mailroom and used that position to save a company. About how every job, no matter how humble, has power if you know how to use it. About how revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about building something so magnificent that those who doubted you can only watch from the ruins of their own choices. "But how did she know what to do?" they'd sometimes ask. "She paid attention," I'd say. "She learned from her mistakes, and when the opportunity came, she was ready." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was true enough. I had paid attention to every betrayal, every scheme, every weakness in my first life. I had learned from my mistakes, the fatal mistake of trusting family who saw me as an obstacle. And when the opportunity came, in the form of death and rebirth, I had been ready. The empire I built wasn't just about revenge, though that had been the seed. It was about proof. Proof that I had always been valuable, had always been capable, had always been worthy. Every success was a vindication not just of my second life, but of my first one too. The girl who died in that car crash hadn't been worthless. She'd just been surrounded by people who couldn't see her worth. Now, as I stood at the top of the Henderson Industries Tower, looking out at the city lights below, I thought about that frightened girl in the mailroom, holding an envelope that could destroy everything or save everything. She'd made the right choice. She'd chosen herself. My phone buzzed with a message from David. "Coming home for dinner? The kids are asking about you." I smiled, gathering my things. The office could wait. The Empire would still be there tomorrow, but family, real family, chosen family, that's precious. As I drove home in my sensible, well-maintained car, I'd never forgotten those cut brake lines. I passed the site of my first death. They'd built a shopping center there now, all glass and chrome and modern efficiency. No trace of the twisted metal and broken dreams that had once decorated that stretch of road. I didn't slow down. That chapter was closed. That life was over. I had a new life now, one I'd built from spite and determination, and the strange gift of remembering a future that would never be. The house was warm and bright when I arrived, full of laughter and the smell of David's cooking. The children ran to greet me, talking over each other about their days. David kissed me, flour in his hair from whatever he was baking. This was real. This was mine. This was worth every moment of pain in both lives. Later that night, after the children were asleep and David was reading in bed, I stood on our balcony looking at the stars. Somewhere in another timeline, another Sophie was dying in a car crash, betrayed and alone, but not here. Not in this life. I'd won. Not just the company or the money or the revenge, but the life I'd always deserved. The family who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them. The success that was mine alone, not stolen or attributed to others. The peace that came from knowing I'd faced my demons and emerged victorious. "Can't sleep?" David asked, joining me on the balcony. "Just thinking. About how different life can be if you get a second chance." He wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Everyone deserves a second chance." "Not everyone," I said, thinking of Catherine and Elena, "but some people make the most of them." We stood there together, looking at the city where I'd died and been reborn, where I'd been demoted and had risen, where I'd been betrayed and had triumphed. It was a good city, full of possibilities and second chances. My story could have ended differently. I could have used my knowledge to simply escape, to run away and start fresh somewhere else. I could have chosen forgiveness over revenge, reconciliation over justice. But that wouldn't have been me. I was Sophie Henderson, the girl who'd been demoted to the mailroom and had used that position to bring down an empire of lies and build one of truth. The mailroom had been my lowest point and my greatest opportunity. Every package I'd sorted, every delivery I'd misdirected, every moment of calculated incompetence had been a step toward this life. They'd thought they were punishing me by putting me there. Instead, they'd handed me the keys to their destruction. I thought about the young employees who sometimes came through our mailroom now, part of the management training program I'd instituted. They spent a week in every department learning the company from the ground up. When they reached the mailroom, I always made a point to visit them. "This is where it all starts," I'd tell them. "Every communication, every contract, every deal passes through here. If you want to understand a company's heart, work in its mailroom." They'd nod, not really understanding, seeing it as just another rotation. But sometimes one or two would get it. They'd realize the power in the mundane, the opportunity in the overlooked. Those were the ones I watched, the ones I promoted, the ones who understood that power isn't always where you expect to find it. The Henderson Industries mailroom became something of a legend in business schools. The CEO in the mailroom they called the case study. How Sophie Henderson had turned corporate humiliation into corporate domination. They got most of the facts wrong, of course. They didn't know about the rebirth, the future knowledge, the careful planning that had started long before that demotion. But they got the heart of it right. Never underestimate someone just because they're at the bottom. Never assume that demotion means defeat. And never, ever put someone with nothing left to lose in charge of your most important communications. As the years passed and my children grew, as the company expanded and my legacy solidified, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd never been reborn, if I'd simply lived that first life, dying at 28, betrayed and forgotten. Would Catherine and Elena have succeeded in their plans? Would my father have ever seen the truth? Would grandfather have died alone in Maine, believing his family had abandoned him? There was no way to know, and dwelling on it served no purpose. I had been given a gift, terrible and wonderful in equal measure: the knowledge of my own death, the memory of every betrayal, the chance to change everything. I'd use that gift not just for revenge, but for redemption. Not just for destruction, but for creation. The mail room where I'd sorted packages was now a reminder that every ending can be a beginning. Every demotion can be a promotion in disguise. Every betrayal can become a triumph. You just have to be willing to see the opportunity in the obstacles, the power in the powerlessness, the victory in the defeat. My story, the real story, not the sanitized version told in business schools, was one of death and rebirth, of betrayal and revenge, of falling to the bottom and rising to the top. It was a story I'd never tell in full, carrying the secret of my second chance to my grave. But it was also a story of hope, proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gives you exactly what you need to set things right. As I finally went to bed that night, lying next to David in our beautiful home, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of my first death, I whispered a thank you to whatever force had given me this second chance. Then I closed my eyes and slept peacefully, no longer haunted by memories of dying alone, no longer afraid of being betrayed. I had won, and that victory had been worth every moment in the mailroom.